Good morning and welcome into Big Talk, college sports with a Midwest perspective, blue collar and blue blood. I'm Dalton Shetler. That's Sam Sprugger next to me. Sam, how are we doing today?
It's Friday. It's almost the end of the week. That's always a plus, Dalton.
Yeah, a little TGIF. You can't beat that. We are coming off of a week where the most predictable football game occurred, and it panned out the way we thought it would. Michigan wins the Big Ten football championship over Iowa.
It wasn't 306-0 like I expected, though.
But we did expect no Iowa points, and we were right.
They came through.
Do you know how hard it is to expect a shutout and for that to come true? Like
it's almost like they wanted to appease everybody. That's why they didn't score. It had nothing to do with their inept offense. It was everybody expects us to, so let's give them a Christmas present.
Yeah, there you go. So now we have bowl games set. We know the Big Ten will be a part of the college football playoff. We'll discuss a little bit about football, but most of the show is going to be about Big Ten basketball because the men are, for some of them, they've already got their full swing of the two games in pocket. Right. A lot of teams have only played the one. They got one more coming this weekend or whatever it is. To get to their two games before we get into Big Ten play at the new year. Big Ten women's basketball is taking place, and there's a lot of new, I'd say, milestone accomplishments that have taken place since we last spoke, so we'll dive into some of that. Mm-hmm. And also, we're in the middle of the NCAA volleyball tournament. We can kind of give you an update, too, with how the Big Ten's doing there. So there's a lot taking place. Let's go ahead and start with how about Big Ten basketball? Because this, to me, and I know Sam will have a different perspective because he is a Purdue fan, which is totally fine. But I do want to mention, because I think what we saw this past week with Northwestern beating Purdue is such a refreshing sign for Big Ten sports. And again, I know you're going to have a different perspective, as you should. You're a fan. But hear me out. My point is, we just went through a football season where we made the joke before the year, maybe we could just skip to the final week of the regular season, play Michigan, Ohio State, see who wins, and just leave it. And that played out in front of us for 3 months. Like, there was nothing exciting about this Big Ten football season. There were no upsets. Penn State proved to not be the contender we thought it would be. That could maybe upend one of them or even give us a dramatic finish. Like, we went through
not even any suspense.
No, and that's the thing. Not only did we not have an upset, we didn't have any suspense. There was no drama. There was no intrigue to maybe an unexpected result throughout the entire football season. And so to start off Big Ten basketball, and in the first game, the number one team in the country gets beat by mighty Northwestern. Oh, it feels good for real sports to be back. That's what it felt like to me.
It makes me feel better, though, that Minnesota beat Nebraska, the other undefeated team in the Big Ten.
Right.
Because then it does. Northwestern's not horrid. I mean,
no.
So but you're right. It does. It makes it one of the situations where you're like, okay, they may be the best team, but some teams are going to get their punches in, and they're going to land.
Yeah.
And so
that's how sports are supposed to be. It's how
correct.
Big Ten's supposed to be. That's how the football season's supposed to be, too.
Exactly. The fact that Iowa was the best the West could offer to play the East is extremely sad.
I mean, it was just a handful of years ago where an Ohio State team would go to Purdue or Iowa and just get kicked down because those teams would just beat them for one game a year. They weren't better than Ohio State,
right,
but for one game a year, they would beat them. And that idea was just non-existent. I mean, Michigan and Ohio State just rolled through everybody. And it was not really a fun entertainment year. I mean, the biggest entertainment we had,
little competition against them too. That's the kick. They had a couple of games where they were somewhat close, but
there was nothing there.
There was no competition to it.
The only intrigue we had really was the Michigan sign stealing scandal. Like, we didn't have good storylines on the field this entire Big Ten football season.
We talked about it for 6 weeks straight.
Well, it's also why Jim Harbaugh only coached for 6 games or 7 games
of the 12, or 7 of the 13.
The 13
Sorry.
with the title game,
It was
yeah.
over 500.
But so that was my takeaway watching that Purdue Northwestern game, and we'll dive into some of the other things related with it too. But the idea that, hey, the most talented team, the best team, isn't going to win every time, and that's what sports are supposed to be. We just missed out on a year of it in football, and it was nice to see that come back with basketball. It was a refreshing welcome to me. I know, obviously, as a Purdue fan, you probably experience it a little bit differently, but the point being that, hey, oh yeah, we play these games for a reason. We don't know the results. Like we just talked about, we opened the show, the Big Ten championship game in football. Everybody knew what was going to happen there. Like, and it played out that way. Like I thought it was a refreshing sign to be like, oh yeah, sports kind of feel like they're back now.
Hey, look, the world is back to normal now.
Yeah, and Northwestern beats a great team. Yeah, everything's sound again.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm not upset. I'm upset as a fan that Purdue lost, but I agree with you.
Yeah,
that it makes it more of an. I'm still confident Purdue. Whether I want Purdue to win the national title, I still want them to win the Big Ten, right?
Yeah,
that's we've talked about this. We've established that that's as a fan, that's my preference. Win the Big Ten, then whatever happens in March, great. I'm pretty confident they're going to make it to March. I think they could stumble their way into March.
Yeah,
I want them to win that Big Ten, but I know that it's never going to be easy, and I want them to win a tough Big Ten.
Yep.
So I'm okay with it, even though I'm not happy with it.
Well, and let's be honest, Purdue still, the way they've been playing, is the most impressive team to date. But what a great moment that was for Northwestern. And that was, again, Boo Buie just breaks the hearts of another top team. That guy has done this year after year for some time now.
Yeah.
I mean, Boo Buie is forming quite the legacy.
Yet again, Purdue loses and their team storms the court.
And Northwestern, led by Boo Buie, only had 3 turnovers in 45 minutes of basketball.
They played flawlessly almost.
Yeah.
I mean, but yet I saw somebody say that, like, Purdue struggled. Northwestern played almost a perfect game, and they had to go to overtime and win.
Yep. Well,
so that's saying what you're looking at Purdue with.
And that's what a lot of those teams are going to need to do, because Purdue's that good. Like, it took Lance Jones shooting 1 of 7 to even have that be open, and all the different things that went into it, the turnovers, the bad passes into Zach Edey, like. But the fact that it happened, I was like, yeah,
for sure.
I forgot. I'm so used to just chalking in favorites in Big Ten sports for the last 5 months.
Which is why once you hit March, it's all a toss up, because anybody can have that perfect game. Like, look at FDU last year in the first round. They played their perfect game. Purdue played a bad game. It was a 6-point win for FDU. So it's not a blowout. But yeah. Yep.
So we do know that Purdue is really good. We've talked about that before. It was an awesome moment for Northwestern. Boo Buie, again, does Boo Buie things, hits tough shots, makes great decisions. But outside of Purdue, other teams in the Big Ten that impress you at this point, if it's me, I'm pointing to 2 different teams, and they're both actually in the top 25 now. I'm looking at both Wisconsin and Illinois. If you had to take your pick out of there, who do you like?
Personally, I like Illinois better.
Okay.
I just think they've got more. Not that I think Wisconsin's drab or anything, but I just think Illinois got more in their cupboard. They've probably got more question marks, though. That's the kicker. Is they've got the biggest upside, but they have the biggest question marks too. Wisconsin's going to be pretty consistent. But I like Illinois a little bit better than I do. I like Terrence Shannon Jr. and they've got a lot of really good pieces. They do, and I like the steps that Dane Danger's taken down in the front court. I know it's such a good. It's gonna be every time.
But yeah, no, I'm with you. I like the pieces Illinois has. Wisconsin's just gonna Wisconsin you to death. I mean, they're just gonna pound you to a paste, and that's gonna work for a lot of this Big Ten season. I mean, remember a couple years ago where there was a 3-way tie for the Big Ten championship? It was Michigan State, Maryland, and then Wisconsin just kind of like snuck its way there. And you're like, what? It's just Wisconsin's going to Wisconsin. Like
everybody fights out through the season, and all of a sudden at the end, Wisconsin, hey guys,
yeah,
we're here too.
That's kind of what it's like. And they get there just by just pounding you.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to be able to do a lot of that this year. I'm curious how Wisconsin finishes, but I like what they have in place. And I think it says something when you can say that for Wisconsin, Connor Esijan, who is a Big Ten freshman team member, isn't quite seeing the floor as much as you'd think, isn't shooting maybe as much as you'd think. And a lot of it has to do with the lineup that's in place is clicking so well. Like I think at some point, maybe Connor is able to kind of find his way back in to grab his minutes, but things are just clicking along for the Badgers at this point, and that's a really good sign for Wisconsin.
Yeah, that's not me saying I think Wisconsin's not gonna beat Illinois in the standings, at the end of the season. That doesn't mean that it can't happen. I just, with what they have, and right now they're at 7-1. Illinois is playing really good basketball.
Yep.
And Wisconsin's 7-2, so they're not much difference in record. But I just think right now Illinois, with what they've got, is my preference of pick, and that's not normally the way I would go either. I've always kind of liked Wisconsin and what they do, and things like that, and they always seem to be doing things the right way. You know what I mean? They just kind of power their way, like you said. They just beat you down and beat you down. I can remember when people would say, if you fall down to Wisconsin by 10 points, it's like being down by 25 because you don't get the ball back.
Yeah,
you get the ball when you're allowed. They take 25 of 30 seconds every time they touch the ball. And things like that. Now that may have changed since. I haven't really studied them too much, like one-on-one now, but they still have that likelihood. But I think if they matched up, Illinois would win right now.
And you might be right. I do want to mention, too,
I may be crazy.
I do want to mention both of them have gotten such a big boost from the transfer portal this year too, where AJ Storr for Wisconsin's averaging over 14 points a game.
Right.
He's been such a big boost to what they're doing. He transferred in from St. John's, and then Illinois had Marcus Domas go off in the Garden. How many did he have? Hang on. He had, against Florida Atlantic in that game, 33 points against FAU. Like, this guy from Southern Illinois is absolutely another huge boost to what the Illini are doing. So I think those are two that are really you need to pay attention to, because they're game changers, and they change the dynamics of those squads. Outside of that top three, who else is really sticking out to you at this point? Like, this is where I think it starts to maybe fall back a little.
Can I say it for sticking out in the wrong way?
Yes, and I know where you're going.
You kind of may. It's just the whole state of Michigan.
Yeah,
because since we've talked and they were already starting, Michigan is now lost 3 in a row. They're at 4-5. They're not looking very good. But then you have Michigan State right above them at 4-4, and that. I still think it's probably way too early to hit a panic button, but there are some trending things with Michigan State that I don't know that. Maybe they can't recover from. I don't know. I really don't. But both of those stick out as kind of a big disappointment to this point in the season.
No, and I'd say for Michigan, I didn't expect much more from the Wolverines than where they currently are. I
expected them to be 4-5 though, and not looking good at all.
Well, and what surprised me was how good they looked a couple weeks ago, or like 3-4 weeks ago.
That's why they stand out as not being very good looking, because they took
straight off and now they're coming back down.
Basically nosedived right back down.
Doug McDaniel, watching him, I think he's extremely talented. I think they've got some talent with that roster. I like Shetter. I like what he does. I just don't think defensively. I watched
when you said that.
Remember, my name's Shetler, so I keep close enough with
how to do
all
that.
The different. But I watched their game with Indiana, and I remember hearing from talking with some other media members, because I hadn't had a chance to watch Michigan, and I was like, oh yeah, Michigan's doing pretty well, right? And they're like, well, yeah, I don't think you've watched the last week. And so I was like, what happened? And they're like, well, they can't guard. And I watched that Indiana game, and they can't guard.
They can't guard.
defense is a problem for the Wolverines. And for Michigan State, I mean, it's been noted statistically going top 5 to 500, just how historical the kind of drop is to start this season. And I'm with you. Look, I think there's a ton of pieces with this Michigan State squad. There's just so much talent. The potential is still there. And remember last year, Michigan State went through the year and had so many struggles, roller coaster
ups and
ride
downs all over the place.
And then they got to the Big Ten tournament and they got beat down by the Buckeyes, a not great Ohio State team in that Big Ten tourney. And you kind of sat there and you're like, okay. And
this
then you
was
got
a lose
to
and go home situation. And they got thumped.
And you're like, I don't know what to expect that we will be, because Michigan State had played so well offensively for a stretch. They played so well defensively for a stretch, but they couldn't put them together. And you're like, okay, let's see what March Madness brings. And the opening round, they just dominate USC. Second round, dominate a good Marquette team, as we know now. By the way, back to the Wisconsin conversation, Wisconsin even putting a beat down on Marquette. Wisconsin's pretty impressive right now.
Wisconsin's for real.
Yeah.
Like, we weren't sure that they were going to be for real. That was the problem.
Yeah.
But anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll go back to Michigan State. We hadn't even mentioned yet that Wisconsin beat down Marquette. But then they got to the Sweet 16 and they were a shot away really from beating Kansas State.
Played the best game in that regional.
Yeah. I mean, that was the greatest game, I think, of the tourney last year.
Which, you could even say that, too.
Yeah. Unless you just look at the upset of FDU. Because
and I'm not even looking at that because while they had the best moment of the tournament, maybe
correct.
They didn't have
but
the
best
game. Correct.
was Michigan State, Kansas State. I'm with you there.
It was a fantastic game. I still remember just being like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? And then it goes to overtime. Like, yes, you got more of it. And then it was just a great game.
Yeah.
Great game.
It sure was. And so to me, like, you still have the nucleus of what that squad was.
Right.
You obviously don't have Joey Hauser anymore. And I think schematically that's proving to be a bigger loss than maybe people expected, because what Joey was able to give you and provide you as a big man from the perimeter seemed to be a game changer in the way Michigan State's running its half-court offense. I do think when Jackson Kohler comes back from injury, that'll help a bit with some interior scoring, because Jackson Kohler is somebody you can say, hey, go one-on-one, go down on the block, play. He's creative enough. He's got great footwork. I think Jackson will be able to help give them some relief in that way and at least give another dynamic to this offense. But I mean, let's not beat around the bush. That Wisconsin game, Wisconsin won the 50-50 balls. And that's normally how Wisconsin plays, but it's also normally how Michigan State plays.
Right.
And normally those are two big-time heavyweight boxers just going swing for swing for swing. And it seemed like Michigan State wasn't getting those 50-50 balls or really appearing to be in contention of those 50-50 balls. And to me, schematics aside, that's what needs to be ironed out before anything else. And again, if you're looking to try and fix those issues, who better than Tom Izzo to try and work on those? Sure. And he called his team soft after the game. So something, I think something's got to change there with what they do, maybe in practices or something, just to try and get them to reclaim that identity of getting those 50-50 balls and playing with that edge.
Well, and hopefully he can press the right button, because they got beat by 13 at home against Wisconsin. Normally, Wisconsin-Michigan State game is, 54-52, and this was 70-50. Wisconsin blew up for 70.
Mm-hmm.
Because you stated it. They're almost mirror images of their style, not maybe talent. They're almost always mirror images of the style.
In certain ways, I do want to separate that Michigan State likes to run. Wisconsin does not want to run.
Right.
There are differences, but in terms of toughness, you're right.
Yes, that's what I'm getting at.
Yes.
And thank you for prefacing that, because I was kind of not going the right way. But yes. But yeah, it just doesn't make sense right now. So hopefully, and again, I will still not bet against Tom Izzo until there is no life left in the Spartans. So, that part of it is, I'm never going to give up the anticipation and expectation of Michigan State being just fine and I say fine in quote marks because fine is relative, but it's not maybe fine. Ooh, they're favorites in the NCAA tournament, but they're gonna be fine. They're going to go and make a couple of ripples in the tournament like they did last year, because they were floundering at times last year.
Mm-hmm. They absolutely were. And
Hauser being gone is probably, I think you're right. It's one of those that you didn't anticipate it being such an issue that it is. Now.
And it does change things, but again, I think we're on the same page. The biggest red flag right now is Michigan State's not winning 50-50 balls.
Yeah.
And that's just not how Michigan State plays. So we'll have to see what changes there. They got a tough one at Nebraska Sunday, which that's kind of a funny sentence, but Nebraska's actually playing solid. They were up 10-15 on Minnesota, dropped. Minnesota came back and won that game, so Nebraska suffered its first loss. But it's not going to be an easy one for Michigan State. And then after that game,
lost 2, Dalton. Did they? Lose to Creighton? Did they lose to Creighton? I'll click on it. There are.
Oh, you are right. I forgot about that game over the past weekend. You're right.
They lost pretty big to Creighton.
And then, I forgot about that.
Then lost to Minnesota. So they've lost 2 in a row, but I still don't see. That was what we were really not sure of. Was their record a reflection of who they were playing or how good they were? And it might be a combination, a little bit of both. They're a little bit better than what they're, but they may not be a 7-0, style of team that you expect to be 7 games over 500 even, but they're going to be decent. And that's a tough one. Lincoln's always hard to go to. It's like Piscataway in some senses. You go there and you just don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
It's like chocolates.
But that's a tough one for Michigan State. And then after that, they got about 3 weeks before Big Ten play swings in full. So that's the good news. But over that stretch of time, I mean, they've got to kind of figure themselves out a little bit, much of what we talked about. Okay, outside of those squads, we talked about 5 teams there. Anybody else you want to mention? Maryland's a little up and down. I'm not really sure what's happening with Maryland, where coming out the gates, they are not as strong as I expected them to be. I really thought they might be the 3rd best team in the Big Ten heading into the year, and they're kind of floundering a little bit. They were able to survive and beat Penn State this week in overtime, I believe. But it's definitely not clicking the way you thought it would.
Ohio State's playing. They're 8-1.
Yes.
That really does stick out to me a little bit in the aspect of we didn't have a bunch of expectations out of him.
Well, and Thornton coming back, you knew Thornton would be pretty good because of how he finished last year, but what Gale is giving them too. I mean, that's a pretty big dynamic duo that Ohio State presents, and they're a problem to deal with. Like they're good.
Yeah, they're not beating the best of teams, but they beat Alabama. They've got to win against Alabama. They've beaten Texas A&M. So like they've got some couple pretty good quality wins, and they're showing that they can hang with them and beat them down. And I tell you that they could surprise. They've got Penn State what is today? Tomorrow on Saturday. Then they play UCLA. Then they've got New Orleans, West Virginia, and then they start the Big Ten season in full. And so they're sitting at they're 1-0 right now in the Big Ten. I mean, I guess the biggest surprise to me is who's sitting in first place in the Big Ten right now.
Who is in first place right now? Is it Indiana? We'll get more games played, and that'll change some.
Yeah, but and see, that's what I expect is as we get more and more into the Big Ten season, we're going to see the teams start to even out to where maybe not exactly to what we expected, but it will be more like what we expected.
Yep. Water finds level.
IU may be only 4th. They may be a little bit higher than what they were expected, but I don't anticipate. But you never know; they may shock the world and run the tables and be 20-0.
I did want to mention this before we move on to women's basketball.
Yeah,
this is a pretty big non-conference weekend for Big Ten men's basketball. Illinois plays Tennessee tomorrow at noon. That's a big game. Purdue plays Alabama at 1:30. That's a big game. Indiana plays Auburn at 2:00. That's a solid game.
That's in Atlanta. That's being played in Atlanta.
Oh, I didn't actually see that.
I didn't either until just now. But it's Auburn at IU from the State Farm Arena in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay. And then number 1 Arizona plays Wisconsin. That one's at 3:15 tomorrow. Ohio State, Penn State, you have an actual in-conference game. And then Rutgers and Seton Hall's a nice little flurry finish at 8:30 at night in the Garden State Showcase. But by the way, Rutgers, the story with them is what they're doing on the recruiting trail. Not so much what's going on in the season.
2 of the 3 top recruits.
Yeah. Steve Pikiell's winning right now. But so that's a big day with
He
Big Ten
needs to
hoops
walk
tomorrow.
in everywhere he goes with sunglasses and just.
That's right. I did that.
So that's all. That's it.
And then we mentioned for Sunday, Nebraska and Michigan State will play. Besides that, you have Michigan and Iowa at 4:30. Iowa, oof. They got beat down by Purdue earlier this week, and then last night, Iowa State. I mean, I put that game on, and it was a 30-point game when I put it on, and I sasaid, never mind, and clicked it back to something else.
Well, we know how that ended.
Actually, I watched NCAA volleyball after that. I turned that off. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump on you too, but
that's all right. I started to burp.
You had 4 Big Ten teams in the Sweet 16 for volleyball, and 2 of them won last night. Both Wisconsin and Nebraska move on. Wisconsin had to play against another Big Ten team in Penn State. Nebraska got a big win. Nebraska's so good. And then I watched Purdue and Oregon knocked off Purdue. So Purdue is done. Penn State is done. So now we're down to 2 Big Ten teams left in the Elite 8 in the NCAA volleyball tournament. And what I found interesting, too, is Purdue didn't go away quietly. I was watching that game. They were up in that second set, let it go. In that third set, they battled into extra points. I think the final for that third set was like 29-27.
Holy cow. I didn't realize that.
So Purdue was presenting problems.
Which Dave Shondell, the coach at Purdue, that was his final game. He's retiring after this season. So they went out on a battle for him, at least as he ended his career. And excuse me, my grandparents were friends with his dad, so like my mom and him know each other. Dave know each other really well. So I've met him a few times, and it's good for him to be able to go off into the sunset and say, you know what, I went out, we had one great season to end it, and that's the best you can hope for. Honestly, you could hope for a national championship, but you have realism in there as well.
A Sweet 16 run's still something to be proud of.
Pretty darn good. Pretty darn good. And I'm looking at Sunday's games. If you can somehow travel from Evanston, Illinois to Iowa City, then to Omaha or Lincoln, Nebraska, really.
Oh, yeah, because I didn't mention Detroit Mercy plays Northwestern in that day, too.
You could go to all 3 of those games, Detroit Mercy at Northwestern, Michigan at Iowa, and Michigan State at Nebraska, all for the grand total of $13. $2 to go watch Northwestern and Detroit Mercy, $6 to watch Michigan at Iowa, and $5 to watch Michigan State at Nebraska.
That's wild.
$13. You could take a 20 and still have enough money for popcorn and a hot dog, maybe even.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's
and if you hit the right places, you might be able to get all that at every venue.
Right. That's wild. So real quick, I do want to shift over to women's basketball in the Big Ten, because there's been a couple of pretty good storylines here. Caitlin Clark, in their rivalry with Iowa State, she hit her 3,000th career point in that game. I mean, 3,000 points. She has more than 750 rebounds, more than 750 assists. There's never been a player to do it. Like she's in a class of her own with those milestones. And like she's chasing down the records. The Big Ten women's basketball scoring record is well within sight. Like she can get that pretty easily. She could get, I believe is it Kelsey Plums? can't remember who has the NCAA all-time women's
remember
scoring record.
Whoops,
I'll have to look it up too.
Let's look at it this way. Is it all a foregone conclusion if she decides to stick around and come back next year? She's going to obliterate those?
I think it's already a foregone
that
conclusion
she does it this year.
Okay. Yeah, I think she's within, gosh, I want to say about 400 of the women's all-time scoring mark in college basketball, which, by the way, last year, just for context, she scored just shy of 1,000 points for the season last year. The season, she scored about 1,000 points. So if she does something like that again, then she's going to be, like 37 and 3,800 points for her career, 3,900.
That is insane. Well, I didn't know where Patricia Hoskins, is that what you said?
No, I'm not sure. Hang on, let me try.
Sorry,
it down.
Wait. The second fastest in NCAA. Sorry. She was the second. Caitlin Clark was the second fastest to get to 3,000 points behind Patricia Hoskins.
Okay. So Hoskins,
Valley State in 1985.
Hoskins finished with 3,122. The all-time scoring mark is Kelsey Plum from Washington with 3,527. The Big Ten mark.
That pretty easily.
That's what I mean. Kelsey Mitchell's the Big Ten all-time scoring leader with 3,402. And Caitlin Clark, as we mentioned, is at 3,013 right now. But she's averaging at 30 points a game this year.
Wow. And you know what? I never, the stud players, you always think, well, they're going to hit 1,000 points. It's really hard to hit 1,000 points.
Oh, yeah.
Extremely hard.
Oh, for a career.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, it's a big deal when you hit 2,000 points. You're an absolute all-time great for your school. It doesn't matter how many 2,000 point scorers you have. You hit 2,000 points. That's a huge benchmark. There are a few select players that you could go, yeah, they were special because they hit 1,000 points in one season. And Caitlin Clark, she's special, and she didn't get 1,000 points last year. She easily could, I think, this year. I'm almost guessing. Good Lord.
And I did look up, if you do want to cross over sexes, Pistol Pete, his record is 3,667 points.
She's going to be the all-time collegiate scorer.
Yeah, that's well within sight. It is unbelievable what she's doing.
Well, and if she's at 3,000 now and they've played 10 games, they've got at least 20 left in her.
Yeah.
Just for the regular season. Then you've got two tournaments, being the conference tournament and the NCAA tournament. She's more than likely going to end up with about 3,900 points by the end of this season, I bet. I would be willing to bet. Somewhere close.
She could be back for another year.
And she could come back to add another grand to it and make it almost 5,000 points in her career.
You imagine somebody walks out with nearly 5,000 points? That'd be just stupid.
Yeah.
But by the way, since we're talking women's basketball, I do want to mention here too, there's a pretty big game Saturday. There's a couple of storylines here where Michigan State, in the first year under head coach Robin Freilich, in the debut of the net rankings, came in at number 7. Michigan State came in at number 7 in the net rankings.
Now explain what the net rankings is. I think I know what it is, but they might not know. People might.
So that's a good point. I don't remember all the intricacies of the formula, but basically the net ranking is the sorting tool that the committee uses to do its seeding at the end of the season. Now, on the front end, I'll say too, they're very transparent about it, that the results early on with the formula in the net ranking in the season aren't necessarily the greatest depiction of who it will be in the end. This formula works best with more and more data added onto it. So early on, you'll see a couple of outliers. You'll see some different things. But at the end of the season, it's able to be a much more accurate sorting tool for the committee to use to be able to seed teams and figure out who's in the dance, who's out the dance, where they should be, so on and so forth.
Kind of like the Big Ten, where it's eventually going to level out and become what you expect.
And that formula works that way too. And I mean, like in Michigan State's case, Spartans are 7-1 in women's basketball.
Only
that one
losing
loss
to Creighton.
And Creighton's a good team. And Michigan State led Creighton for a while in that game before they just kind of got out of sync in that second half. But everybody else, Michigan State hasn't just won. I mean, they've just beaten the crap out of. I mean, Michigan State has a scoring margin of about 35 points right now. It's one of the best marks in the country. And so the formula, I think, is really kind of saluting the fact that, hey, you're right. Like, you've played some maybe not as strong non-conference competition, but you've handled business and you're kind of getting paid off for it. But they did also go to DePaul in a true road game and beat DePaul, who's a solid team, a middle-of-the-road Big East team, and beat them by 38 points, 102-64. Yeah. So there's something to be said for this.
Holy cow. Let's see, Wright State, they scored 99, but then they scored back-to-back games at 105. Then they scored 95 against James Madison, 102 against DePaul, and 89 against Miami of Ohio. They can put some points on the board.
Yep. They are number 1 in the country in three-point field goal percentage. They're number 2 in just field goal percentage, and they're number 2 in how many threes they make per game. They're making more than 11 threes a game, and they're shooting it at about a 45% clip, 46%, I think, before the Miami, Ohio game. But so you have this team in Michigan State who, again, they're thin, they're shorthanded in the front court, but they are absolutely able to light it up from the perimeter. They play fast. They score, as you mentioned, kind of 95 points plus is the average.
Which is insane to average that. I'm sorry. Yeah. It just absolutely is.
But they're at 7 in the net ranking. Nebraska will come to East Lansing. Nebraska, I think, is 21st or 23rd in the net ranking as well. They're playing really well. They're coming off a big win where they scored 100 plus against UNC Wilmington. And Jazz Shelley recorded her second career triple-double in that win. She's the first Husker man or woman to get multiple triple-doubles in Nebraska basketball history. Alexis Markowski comes in averaging 17, 18 points a game, more than 9 rebounds a game, right around a double-double. She was the Big Ten's leading rebounder last year. So this is a big one to watch. This is a great game coming up. And Nebraska women's basketball, we talked about, they scored 100 plus. The last 3 halves of basketball for them, they've scored 166 points. So they're coming in red hot, just like Michigan State is. This should be a pretty big game in what is the only early Big Ten game for both of those teams.
I'm looking at the standings and right now, because none of them have played a Big Ten game yet. We're talking about Michigan State getting ready to play. So the women only do one round before they jump into. So
we should mention
after the first
Big Ten women. The conference schedules 18 games, right, where the men play 20.
Why?
I don't know. I've never asked.
So let me ask you, and just really quickly before I get into the rest of the standings, sorry, what were the expectations for Michigan State this year? Like, you're around them. What was the legit, like, what they really thought was an actual expectation for their team this year? Was it be 7-1 at one point, averaging 95 points a game?
I don't necessarily know that it was. I think it was a lot of, well, let's kind of see what happens here, because when Robin came in, she did a great job of retaining so much of the roster and not letting them go to the transfer portal, because, as you know, in this day and age, that's kind of priority number one.
Depends on which way the wind blows, whether you want to go to the portal or not.
So she kept the roster intact, but it was clear heading into the year that this roster was didn't have a lot of front court presence. And that doesn't mean like there's bad play. It's just there wasn't a lot of front court presence. They're just thin on depth there. And it
happens every once in a while, It just depends on the year.
Well, and then one of their forwards actually is out for the year in Isa Alexander. So they got even thinner, and they lost Gabby Elliott. So like there's 2 big injuries with this Michigan State squad. And so far they've been able to persevere, because you thought that would kind of bite them. And they went down to Cancun. they played against James Madison. And I want to kind of preface this because this was one of those turning points, I think, for the players and everybody around where they're like, oh, they can kind of find some ways, huh? Because so they enter that game with James Madison and they're down Isa, they're down Gabby, right? Two of their better rebounders, and they're going to have to find a way to play without them. James Madison came into that game 5th in the country in rebound margin. They were out rebounding their opponents by 22 rebounds a game.
Wow.
James Madison is good. They're projected to win the Sun Belt Conference in women's basketball. And so here comes Michigan State, thin on front court depth. How do they handle that, right? Because they bred their butter on the glass. Michigan State out-rebounded James Madison by 12. And that's kind of when you sat back and you're
34 rebound swing compared to what James Madison's used to.
And without like the typical front court that Michigan State normally kind of has. And you kind of sat there for a moment and you're like, maybe they're able to find ways. Now, here's what's interesting. We mentioned Alexis Markowski comes in from Nebraska, averaging 17-9, nearly 17-10.
Right.
This will be just about the first time Michigan State's going to have to deal with an elite interior scorer, a back-to-the-basket type player. And being thin on front court depth, that's where it's going to be interesting to see what Michigan State's able to do. Mm-hmm. But Michigan State also offensively can turn things around. And don't forget, too, Michigan State, we mentioned they scored 90-some plus points a game. A lot of it's because of their offensive spacing, the way they share the ball. They're one of the best assist creators as well in the country. But they full court press for 40 minutes. And so they're going to get after
the old
the guard.
Nolan Richardson 40 minutes of hell.
Yeah, I mean, it's they try to absolutely just fluster teams for the duration of game, and it fits this roster. I mean, that's how Robin wants to play anyway. Like, that's the kind of long-term vision of Robin here at Michigan State. But this roster, it goes hand in hand with because it's so guard-heavy. That can swing a game for him as well. But that's going to be a huge game tomorrow
for sure.
To pay attention to.
Well, and then you've got Minnesota, who's 8-1. I haven't seen anything about Minnesota. Last year, they weren't the greatest of teams in the world. And, granted, I mean, they lost to UConn by only 18. I say only 18 because it's UConn.
Correct. Correct.
But like they've beaten Kentucky, which, that's not the same as the men's side Kentucky, but Kentucky's still a name that's okay and pretty good. But being at 8-1, that doesn't look like they've beaten anybody, but I'm not as well versed on the women's side. So these teams that aren't very good on the men's side very well may be decent on the women's side. But 8-1 is still nothing to shake a stick at. And I don't know why you would shake a stick at that. Anyway, but they're 8-1. They've got Purdue on Sunday. And then they, for their one game, and then they, on the 30th, they jump in against Iowa. I guess maybe that's where you find out exactly who they are, how competitive they're going to be in the conference. Because that's a murderer's row. They go Iowa, against Maryland, at Michigan, home against Nebraska, at IU. Like that's
Big Ten women's basketball is a grind,
and that's that's not even mentioning that they don't have Ohio State in that. Like Ohio State's a big team in the conference. I mean, they're 7-1. There's only one team with a below 500 record, and only two teams with more than 3 losses in this Big Ten.
Yeah, no,
this is a good conference on the women's side. Very good.
It is. And it's funny you pointed out Minnesota because Minnesota is the other team under a first-year head coach at the program, Don Plitzuweit, who came over from West Virginia from last year. And Minnesota right now being led by Mara Braun. Mara Braun has turned some heads early on. And so if you want to tune in, watch that game against Purdue. She's averaging 19 to 20 points a game.
I'm new to women's basketball, and I know that name.
Yeah. and by the way, she's also a perfect 100% from the free throw line this year.
She's going to miss her next one. Good job.
As long as it's against Michigan State, right? Announcer Jinx, just build it in.
Yep.
But I mean, she's been playing out of her mind. And you're right. The only loss was to a good UConn team that was played at Minnesota.
It wasn't by a ton. And a lot of teams, or a lot of people would say 18 points. You got blown out. Think of Minnesota wasn't great. UConn's UConn. They're still really good.
They are
basketball program. So to only lose by 18 after you're in a rebuild, and it's UConn, that's not a bad showing in my opinion.
No, and I'm totally with you. I do want to provide for context. I believe UConn, because it is still UConn, but I believe they dropped out of the top 25 for the first time in I can't remember how many years. So
They
this
were
is
number
not
6 at the time that they beat Minnesota.
Yeah,
that's what
yeah.
I want. But at the time, it's
No,
still
I'm with
UConn
you.
though. I mean, just like Michigan State's always going to be Michigan State.
I'm not arguing. I'm just providing there's a little bit of context there that UConn
they're having a down season.
Yes, or at least they're having a downtime period.
Comparatively. Ooh, they lost 3 in a row.
Yeah. But yeah, no, so
they have the world's longest winning streak of triple digits. They won 100 straight games. What is it, 102 or something like that?
Something
stupid
ridiculous
like that.
But so
Anyway.
Besides just Caitlin Clark being phenomenal, there's a lot of Big Ten women's basketball storylines to pay attention to. Make sure you tap into because it's a fun year.
I think you need to watch out for Ohio State. I'm going to go on the books and say watch out for Ohio State. Iowa needs to watch out.
Ohio State went down to Tennessee just a week ago and knocked off the Lady Vols in an impressive
won 7
win.
in a row. They dropped their first game and they've won 7 in a row since.
I think, and this is actually probably a good guide or PSA for the newcomer Big Ten women's basketball fan. I think heading into this year, you kind of did tiers, like we did tiers on the men's side of Purdue, Michigan State. I think the tier for the women at the top of like actual projected contenders of the conference, you're looking at Iowa, who is predicted to win it. You're looking at Ohio State, and you're looking at Indiana. Indiana, if they're able to get the ducks in a row, I mean, they've got enough talent with Mackenzie Holmes back, Yarden Garzone taking a big step, Chloe Moore McNeil. But so far, they've been a little rough around the edges to get the year going. I mean, they went to Maine in a bit of a homecoming game for Mackenzie Holmes. She gets to go back home, see her family. It's a really cool, emotional thing. But they were down at halftime to Maine.
Right.
Like Indiana's and Indiana, I still haven't seen the game, but they got blown out by Stanford earlier this year. Now Stanford's a good team,
32. Wow.
Yeah, but Indiana's a good team too. So what happened there? And I haven't been able to see that game.
But it was on the West Coast, so maybe it was the traveling to the West that.
But 32.
Yeah. Well. I'm not making excuse. I'm a Purdue fan here. Okay, I'm not making excuses for them. Jeez.
Normally you pile on.
Yeah, well, they should know better. Well, they're like the IU men's team who can't travel across the country and compete. If you remember, what was it? 2 years ago, they were in the play-in game and won on Wednesday and had to travel out west.
Oh,
play
yeah.
on Friday.
That was brutal.
That was brutal. I think that's why they need to split up those. If there's a team that's feeding in, and just automatically build it in and just say 2 teams are going to go into the west or that.
If you're playing in Dayton, you're going to play somewhere
on that
a certain
side
mile
of the
radius.
Country. Yeah. I think that because that, even though I'm a Purdue fan and I enjoy watching IU get thumped. That's pretty unfair.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Hey, let's make you play an extra game. Then after you battle through that and win, we're going to make you travel 3,200 miles across the country and get in like at 4:00 in the morning on the day you play.
Yep.
Whatever,
No, I'm totally with you. But yeah, so there's a lot happening with Big Ten women's basketball. It's exciting. Make sure you tune in for
Maine by 8 points.
That's what I mean. Indiana's talented, but something seems to be a little bit sluggish there to start the year.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see if they kind of round into form. But
again, I expect it to kind of
water finds
eventually, at least as level as possible. That's what I'm expecting.
Both on the men's and women's side. But these are fun games, so make sure you tune in, tap in this weekend because there's a lot of good Big Ten basketball action taking place. All right, Sam, are we ready to close down shop for another week?
I do believe we may have just put a nice little bow on episode 98.
Nice.
98 weeks.
98, huh?
Yeah, 98 weeks we've been doing this. Impressive.
Okay. Woo! Yeah, it sure is.
Right before Christmas, we will have our 100th week.
How about that?
Wow. How about that? But hey, if you want to send us gifts, email us at big. Well, I don't even remember the. I'd have to look it up. Hey, how about you just DM us on any of the 3 following or 4 even following social media platforms, on the TikToks, the Instagrams, and the platform formerly known as the Twitter. You can go at B1G _ B1G Dalton, not BIG _ talk big talk. Then go to Facebook, and it's B1G Talk Big Talk. Not all Big Talk. All Big Talk's a totally different show. That's not us. But if you want to send us gifts, just DM us, and we'll get you the address to send those gifts to. We prefer something that fits into an envelope. I mean, we'll accept anything, but an envelope, about this big, maybe green. I'm okay. Green's your favorite color, right?
That's right. Go green.
And I'll support whatever color Dalton likes. So send us green stuff.
That's great.
But then we are on the ASAP network every week. We stream on Friday mornings, and then later that day, our podcast version, along with our Spotify video cast, comes out through Lounge Media Group. Anywhere you can find podcasts, you can find the audio.
All right. So for another edition of Big Talk, college sports with Midwest perspective, blue collar and blue blood, that's Sam Sprunger. I'm Dalton Shetler. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and so long.
See ya.